All right. So, hi everyone. My name is Sejal Khanna, and I work as an iOS developer at Swiggy right now. Previously, I was working with a company called Get My Parking, which is based in Bangalore, but the entire app was functioning in US and Europe. Prior to that, I was working with a fintech startup, which is called One Bank. And today's presentation is going to be more less tech, but more about how tech can be improved with a certain touch of UX. And my concept for today is, crafting user-centric applications and basically prioritizing the user experience. So, like, basically, I'm going to ask this question, and I would request you guys to, interact more with me on the chat as well. Why should developers basically prioritize their efforts to, make a good UX? Like, since you all work in some great companies, I'm sure you've all, sort of experienced some way or the other wherein, you've had to put in the effort of, making a better UX, or your app was having certain issues because, there was a chance that UX was not working out well. And but what was your initiative as a dev? Like, I would hope that you guys can put something on the chat box. Right. Anyone else? Got it. So my point of this entire concept, coming up with this concept as a dev, was basically me watching a couple of apps that I worked on, and how UX impact of a developer actually makes a lot of impact on the UX of the application. Now, when I talk about this, what I actually mean is that of recently at Swiggy itself, we were having a big brainstorm session right now, because there were a certain points, because we've been migrating our apps tech stack. So we've been facing a lot of performance issues, right? Internally. And those performance issues happened, and we wanted to figure out where things were going wrong, because no matter how many PMs come up to you and they share their perspective on a UX, or the designer comes up with a great UI, the end user's user, like whatever the end user is going to use, is something that a dev can only create, right? The whatever code we are writing is basically responsible for the end goal, end user's consumption. My point of this conversation was more or less about like the entire brainstorming session that happened. We came up with a couple of pointers that actually were a lot more impactful. Now, when we started off, we decided now identifying gaps. Now, what happens when we talk about gaps? Assume there's an application wherein you're probably using some food delivery application, or a grocery delivery application, and like I mentioned, a user is probably stuck in a loop, okay, and there's an issue that the user once logs in is trying to get a set, like put a product to the cart, and after a certain time he's trying to check out through payment or something, but the user is for some reason, for some issues on the app side, getting redirected to the login screen again, because for some reason the cache did not get updated or something or the other. Now, in those cases, the user's entire UX is gone to shit. So there is no point that in any way the user will have any way of figuring it out how to, and eventually it will lead to a certain amount of frustration for a user, and which is something that we need to sort of ignore or avoid as much as possible. Also, then there are certain things I also wanted to discuss one point, which before this presentation starts also. When we talk about UX, the first thing that comes to our mind is either a UI UX developer or a PM, right? So those are the two main stakeholders that reach out to us with certain enhancements, or additional pointers which will help in increasing our app's performance, probably, or making a better application feature or something. But the thing is that unless and until, I believe that from what I've seen so far at Swiggy or at any big companies, what I've seen so far is people take an initiative on their own as devs. And what happens is, when you take initiative as a dev, you come up with solutions which can make a major impact on probably the app's performance, the app size, which we will talk about a little more in the later on the application, on the presentation. But something that's to ponder about more, like wherein exactly where a dev's role comes in. Also thought, like, we came up with a couple of during the brainstorming session, we came up with a lot of solutions that how we can probably work on the UX of the application, how we can make it better for a user to understand that there are certain other applicational parts in the app. So assuming Swiggy itself, we have Instamart and Dine Out as our segmentary parts, right? So now, for a user to understand that within this one app we have multiple pods and clusters, it is very imperative or important that the user, or the end user, should be able to understand. Now, if my my mom or my dad or my grandparents have to use this application, it has to be a very well self-explanatory application. And that does not just happen when a product manager comes up with a feature. It also happens with how we have set up the screen stacks, or probably how we have created the flow of the application for a user to understand, right? And then I talk about aligning stakeholders. Now, when I talk about aligning stakeholders, it actually comes from the fact, again, that taking of initiative. So initiative comes in when we so let's say most of our companies have hackathons that happen, right? We all have some kind of hackathons that come in, or we as devs also have certain understanding of things that are coming in new in the market or our tech stacks, and we can always take the initiative of being a stakeholder for our own, like code owners are probably assigned to a certain segment of code or module. Similarly, something of a UX level also understanding should be assigned as a stakeholder, that one person is responsible for understanding if we are doing everything right in the flow of the user's app. All right. So like I've already discussed, when I'm talking about UX, it's basically whatever it appears to be. Like your application's UX is what a user's flow or user's journey is going to be about. Now, user's journey, I understand that we're all from the technical background, right? So why do I talk about UX so much? Why is it such a priority? It is a priority, and it is also a responsibility of the dev to understand why UX is important, because unless and until we do get that, we will not put in the effort actually to understand like where the things are going wrong. We cannot wait for certain seniors to come up to us, or certain issue from the users end come to us, that this is where your app is crashing, this is where we are facing an issue, this is the place where we are unable to use properly. So these things are something that we need to keep in mind on our end as well, right? Now, there's a term in the when I was researching for this presentation as well, I came across this whole segment of development which is called as UX driven development. Now, even up until now, I did not have a big understanding of this concept up until I reached researched a lot about this during the phase of creating this presentation today. Now, what happens is that all the product based companies that we are all working for, and all the applications that today in the market go for an end user or consumer, need to have a UX driven development approach. What that really means is actually strategizing basically what your approach for every line of code is going to be. Whatever you write today, for assuming I give a view, a certain frame, a certain fixed amount of width or height. What happens is that I don't understand the fact that if somebody with a phone with phone size which is very small, or a phone size which is very big, how will it impact the screens? And then, like if I give it 15 cross 15, maybe it's going to crash on the SE level, or it's going to be a very small view on the iPhone 15. Now, certain things are supposed to be kept in mind as a dev. Like, so when I'm writing every line of code, it has to be understood on a level of scalability as well. Then there's also, we're not just building a product, right? So this is, we're also responsible for it as well. We are more or less supposed to take ownership of our every feature that goes live into the application. Then obviously, like I mentioned in the presentation as well, that prioritizing the user's needs, also not just because we have to ensure the end product, but also because it is basically something that we need to create the best of the best, right? We're all working for companies, and there's a big competition for every brand, every company, and they all require a certain push to become the best out of the lot, right? So now, what is that extra effort that is required on our end? Then obviously, like I mentioned here, mindset that fosters, right? So basically, this entire UX driven development is going to give so much of innovation and creativity to us as well, because every time we are writing something, we need to have the understanding that how it is going to impact the end user as well, not just giving it to the QA for testing and it should pass the bugs, because that's not the end goal. The end goal is actually reaching to our houses where our families, our friends use the same application the next day, right? So that's something. And like I've put a picture here, if you see, there's recently we worked on a dynamic widget in the application of Swiggy, and it's basically something that I came up with, and I actually discussed it later with the team as well. Now, what we see is on the screen, there's this widget which when on long press is highlighted on the screen, and you can see that it's a certain widget that happens on the application. Now, if somebody who is not well aware of the application, it is not a very understandable feature as well when you're long pressing something, and it is not something that instinctively comes to us to understand, a long press is the reason why the next screen will open, right? Or the next action will take place. So to make it as simplified as possible, maybe there's a guided concept on the screen wherein user is already given a tooltip that says long press for moving to the next screen. So a certain elements of understanding that we can give it to the user to make it self-explanatory. Okay. All right. So like through the course of creating the presentation, I actually spoke to a lot of developers within my own team and multiple companies as well. And when I spoke to them, something came up, and this question I'll ask on the chat again as well. Like why, or like how can developers take the initiative in writing code which makes the UX better? I'll give 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and if you have guys any points, please drop it in the chat. I'll try to incorporate those. Any pointers if you guys have?
Sejal, can you repeat the question? I
Yeah.
think.
So my question is that, like as developers, we're all developers. What are your pointers that you think that any app's UX can be put in better state through a developer's perspective or initiative. So are there any pointers that you guys have probably taken initiative in your companies wherein you work probably on some sort of improvement that eventually led to a good business impact or users impact? Right. Great. I mean, these are pretty much all the points that, even I came up with when I spoke to a lot of developers actually. Asking a friend, recommendations and suggestions, reorder. All these pointers are something now that even our application is covering. And most applications have now understood that, you cannot make a user, because it's a big application, eventually there are certain points we make it a little more complex than it should be. So try to simplify it is the main end goal for us. All right, so I'll give you a couple of pointers that came in through these conversations. First was screen adaptability. So like I mentioned as an example also, right? Given a view of certain width and height, which is fixed 15 cross 15, probably won't work the same way on iPhone SE, or probably won't work on the same way it worked for iPhone 15. So that's the main thing that every developer has to keep in mind when they're doing mobile development or probably web development or any form of front end actually, because eventually it's supposed to be for every user, and we cannot create a restrictive, application or web application. So screen and assuming that iOS is relatively a less number of devices, so it's a little more easier for me. But then obviously when I talk about Android, there's a huge number of screen sizes that happen, and I see my Android counterparts being very frustrated when it comes to making responsive screens in the application. So that's something that we all need to keep in mind when we're doing development. Then there's also app size reduction. This is one thing that we've been working a lot on Swiggy, and I've been working with the team. Like 2-3 of us are actually focused completely on app size reduction right now, like using like very simple example of putting all your assets to a cloudinary base is something that we usually should do, as in a better experience of creating an application which has a relatively lesser size. Now when I talk about app size reduction, what happens is there's a chance that the user who's not been using the application for some time thinks that the app size is a little too huge, and probably will get rid of it and say that it's just occupying space now, or probably it is in some way or the other hindering their performance. Now we don't want that. We wouldn't want our users to go out of our application's user base. And I think the best way is to keep making it as optimized as possible and reducing the app size with every feature release that goes out, because it is something that will be a constant issue. And the other day I was talking to someone, and they said that PM, why don't PMs focus on app size? It's not like they don't focus it, but it is not their primary focus, because it's a standard problem that started in the application's beginning and will continue, because with every release the size will also increase, and the features are getting attached to the application. It is our responsibility or initiative basically, wherein we take the initiative of reducing size with every release. We bring out new methodologies or apply new methods wherein we can help out in some way or the other to reduce the app size. Then obviously, like I mentioned, right? So in any way, the app's UI should be very interactive, but very easily interactive, right? So simple concept, like on a screen when you have a pop-up and there is no way that there's no cross button, there's no cancel button, the user is restricted. Now what does he do? Does he have to kill the app and come back again? We wouldn't want that. We give them a very small cross button, which is difficult for any person to press. Maybe some people find it difficult because of some issues on screens, or less amount of interactive responsiveness through the phones probably. So to avoid those kind of very minute issues that we don't really think about but are actually a big impact also on the application, right? Then also, like I mentioned, like never let your user get stuck in a loop. So if I'm talking about login, like I mentioned, allowing a user to log in and then not letting them check out on the application, again taking them back to login, this kind of a loop is something a user will be stuck in for I don't until the next release, and we wouldn't want the user to drop off or get frustrated, or have a really bad experience of UX here. So maintaining the screen stack, basically understanding every screen stack that we're creating, has to be a very important aspect of the app's journey or the user's flow basically. All right. So like I mentioned, right? So devs are not just responsible for the architecture or the design that they are working on. It's also part of the job of our job to give inputs on the UX and UI as well. Right. So if I find that something in our application does not make sense to me, I should actually pinpoint it to the PM. And if my team agrees with me, good. If it does not, then it's okay. Then I'll understand what their point is. But bringing in on that kind of a concept of talking about it as a dev, also pointing out things like these is what helps a lot of these big products that are coming like right now in the market, which are doing so well. And that's also because collaboratively they're working with all teams, and it's not just PM team, design team, or our team. It's actually a collaborative effort that eventually end product needs to be a good like answer to it. All right. So like I've put up a couple of ways to contribute to your app's UX. Now, I actually saw this in the chat also. Somebody's mentioned personalized recommendations and, suggestions. Again, like how easy it would be that, for a user to understand. It is something that comes in from initiative from us as well, not just a product's perspective, but from us also, that giving a user suggestions is something, we can create like detailed algorithms to understand like where the user is dropping off probably, and to understand how we can give them a certain nudge to see that acha, there's this certain recommendation, and maybe they can go through this kind of a simpler process of figuring out what they want to order, right? Then one of the very common things is efficient search and filtering, right? So when we talk about search, there are certain applications when I type let's say FAR, they will give me a list of about 20 examples, but what I need is actually filtered out top 3 results of the nearest restaurant probably of some name, right? So if I'm probably searching Cafe, then it's probably FAR, and the top 3 should be something of a relatable to the name that I've typed in. So making it as easy as possible for the user, so that he does not have to type the whole name, and we give him a better search optimized result. Then again, real-time order tracking. This is something that I've seen in most companies, even in my previous organization, that wherein a dev took an initiative of, bringing in, especially the iOS folks in my community, actually, if there are any iOS folks today, we all attended WWDC keynote that happens with the Apple developers community. And from therein, we all come up with new solutions that can be incorporated to the apps. Now, Dynamic Island was something that came in, and, eventually it was implemented in all our apps. And now it's a very good feature when you talk about live tracking of your orders. Probably even when you're on our app, Swiggy app also, you can see like on your locked screen, you can understand where a driver is right now or where the delivery partner is, and it is a lot more easier for you to as a user to understand that you don't have to go to the app to check your progress right now. So that also obviously makes a lot of impact. Then when I talk about interactive user interface, now I understand that when I talk about this, I've actually given an example of a loader actually. So when I talk about a loader, what happens is loader is basically a circular, thing that comes in whenever there's a small API call or there's a process that's happening in the application, right? Now, what the thing is that sometimes there are processes which are very long also, probably take a minute or something. So let's say in one of my fintech application that I was working on at one bank, we basically had a screen wherein a user's certain entry points had to be calculated, and on the next screen he will see the expense and taxes that he has to cater to, and the reimbursements that he needs to file. Now, within this whole process of going to the next screen, it was a slightly longer process. So we added a small loader, or I don't know if I think most of the people who are on this call will have a good reminiscence of using the Google Chrome dinosaur animation that comes in every time the internet goes off, or a user is not basically on the application. Probably the internet is working or offline. So we've all actually played that silly game and actually stood on the same application without killing it, right? So at some point or the other, it's something that actually increased Google Chrome's user retention in a huge way. So something of those kinds is something that we also created at one bank. We created a small game kind of a thing where a user, there's a small airplane that keeps going through the screen, and you have to make sure it stays on the same frame of a circle. And when you tap on it, you'll get your certain points that keep flying through the screen. Now, it's a very simple achievement kind of a feel good factor applications edition, but again, like I mentioned, it is something that will impact a user's flow. Talking about the payment options, so this is something that every dev should actually focus a lot more, because monetization is a very important aspect. Putting in payment options, doing POC on new kind of payment, like additional parts, is something that's very important. So right now at Swiggy, we were recently talking about doing a POC on Apple Pay and how its integration will affect our user base in India and otherwise. So that kind of things are something that will obviously give a huge impact. And obviously, when I talk about Indian community, we're all very skeptical about money, right? So we're very worried about payments that happen, and making it sure that the user feels very secure through this process is very important. So if there are any time lags, the user should have an appropriate error message that says, please hold on, this will take certain amount of minutes, and you don't have to worry, your transaction will go through. So those kind of things are very important when you talk about UX driven development. Then there are two more features that I'm going to talk of, which is accessibility feature, and something that I will talk a little more in the next slides. But then there's localized content, which I think is again very important for our applications. It has to give the personalized touch, and it is obviously a little more effort on the devs end, but the end result of it is very great, because using Uber for a driver is a lot more easier if it is probably in his own language or users mother native language. So giving them that kind of an option is a good option always. Like, it will always give you a better user base number and retention. I'll again circle back to the accessibility feature, and I'm talking about this because recently, about like last week itself, there was this day called Global Accessibility Day. And this is one feature that iOS came up with recently. It is basically something that caters to people with disabilities who are unable to hear, or have visual impairment, or any kind of monetary issue, like motor issues or something like that. So accessibility is a feature that again came in as an initiative from a devs and at Swiggy, at least. I'm sure in most organizations it's something that probably is not something that comes in from a PM's end, because they're talking about features. It probably comes from some sort of devs as well, because I think they will take the initiative of making the app as accessible as possible. I wouldn't go a lot more in these points. We'll have this recording shared with you, and I wouldn't go a lot through the points. But yeah, I mean, accessibility is one feature which will make your applications UX a lot more usable and scalable in the long run. Okay, so last segment more or less is about the technical approach again. Like I mentioned, how as devs we can make things better. Now again, I'll just give you the briefing of the top points here. So when I talk about this is performance optimization, right? App should be as smooth as possible. Any kind of glitches, any kind of restrictive movements is something that will eventually lead to a user's a drop off point. Then talking about security measures, right? So very, very important that your data is secure. And this is something, again, a devs initiative will help a lot, because we need to understand how we can, in any which way, give the user an ecosystem where he, feels safe, that is probably, any kind of data details that are saved on the Swiggy app or your applications is safe as, any other way. I've already mentioned about responsive design, which again comes in from texture, auto layout, all those kinds of frameworks that we use today in at least iOS, because as flexible and scalable as the application is, its user experience is better, its user base is better. Then again, reduced app size. I've already discussed a lot on this point. Actually, I actually recently implemented on-demand resources. Again, basically that's something that Apple gives us an option of keeping all our assets on the Apple cloud, and you can fetch them as and when you want in an application. You don't have to keep those assets locally to keep, to occupy so much of space in the app. Again, error handling. I've seen so many places when, the error screen comes on the application, and there's this one caricature who is holding his head and probably just, written error or network error or something. But then there's no escape from the screen. You cannot refresh, you cannot cross, you cannot cancel. So the user is now restricted and doesn't know how or where he should, take an exit in the app. Very small pointers that I'm talking about, but their impact is very huge. And in any way, like I mentioned here as well, in no way should a user be blocked. That's the main intent for us. And again, the last point is obviously about offline functionality that we've talked about. So more or less around those lines. Offline functionality, I'll just put on one point. So that's what you have to make sure that your caching mechanisms are really well equipped for everyday data essentiality. Now, we wouldn't want that if a user's internet is not working, his first screen does not even show him any kind of data at all. So we wouldn't want that kind of a restriction as well. Last is my one small, case study that I came across. It's very common as well when we talk about Airbnb. I think most of the devs today know how recommended or recognized is the Airbnb's UI UX ecosystem. And just the fact that when you talk, I've actually shared a link here for the people, and I'll share it on the group as well. But when you go through these case studies about Airbnb, you'll understand that it is actually a lot of the devs who've actually taken the initiative from their teams, who came in with ideas where, how they could optimize the search. That was something that one of their devs came in with. Then how to optimize speed of the order, like screen movement. All of that actually came in from devs. That it wasn't just something that came in from the other teams. So again, that's what the main initiative point is. And I think I've covered most of my points that I had to. And I'll now move on to the questions. You can all connect with me over LinkedIn, and anytime drop a message in case of any questions or referrals. Thank you. I'll wait on the questions now. Slido. Suggest how to consider trade-offs for Android, obsessing a lot on phone. Yeah, I understand that. I've actually had a lot of conversation with my Android counterparts, and I think that during the phase of the development itself, when we keep in we don't have to wait for the QA to test in on multiple devices. Actually, what I saw, one of my good friend, what he used to do is he used to take the smallest phone possible, and he used to take the biggest phone possible on Android, and he would create the application somewhere that it caters to both. So that is something that I saw. It is again, I wouldn't know a lot about the Android's technical aspect of it, but something that I saw him doing up close was that you used to make sure that the app is not in any way suffering because of this responsiveness and adaptability. Yes, I think this question I can answer. So the Swiggy's search actually involves AI ML models as well, and that we again have a separate team that takes care of the entire basically understanding of what kind of search improvisation can be done. We do it as devs, as a front end developer as well, but then again we also have a dedicated team for it. How do you deal with person making decisions for you? Have you faced any situation where you think? Yeah, that happens a lot, Kriti. Actually, there's a lot of personal bias when I'm like, I'm telling in my team, this is something we should do. This is going to be so great, and then they all obviously give me valid reason or points, why it wouldn't work out the way it, in a larger perspective. Because I don't have a lot of experience when I talk about development. It's been hardly 3-4 years for me. So there are a lot of devs on this call as well who have a huge experience, and in my team, so they know the wider picture and perspective, and they understand that where this thing can go wrong, so that like long run thought process is still something that probably I will lag, and which is wherein the personal bias comes in. So innovation again in terms of UX, we actually keep an eye out for the competition. That is for sure. We do refer to what Zomato is doing, and I think so do they. With it's the ecosystem that works both ways, and it's also something that we do. One thing is that, like I mentioned, we as an iOS developer, we have this convention called WWDC, or anything that Apple comes up with up recently. So whatever Apple developer community comes up with, and if it is something that will help in my app's UX, I will definitely come up and talk to my team, discuss about its pros and cons, and try to implement it as much as possible. I don't think I have the numbers, but yeah, I mean, I do have an understanding of what I've seen in my applications, Vicky, wherein the error handling, or the impact of these, because I've seen it happening up close in my own ecosystem of people that are using this application, where an error comes in, and we drop off through this app because it's not letting us go anywhere now. So restricting a user is something that will eventually put a drop to the user's retention as well.
Just a follow-up question on this, like your PMs and the BI team would have some metrics around that as well, right? Whenever you did an experiment, they would have some
Absolutely.
numbers.
So we have an XP that runs for a couple of our features, couple of our integrations. Now those XPs are very closely monitored, and every metric is calculated on, discussed upon, how its impact is happening or not. There are a huge number of XPs that since I joined Swiggy within the past few months itself have not panned out the way they should have. But then there are some which have made a huge impact. So like we recently rolled out group reorder. So those kind of features are something that have given us a big impact already. So their metrics are probably a lot more better, and when talking about the thought process. Um, yeah, so accessibility is actually a whole kind of a concept. It's called A11Y in iOS apps. You can refer to the app development process of A11Y. It's actually an integration that happens of alternative text keys that we include for the the people with lesser accessibility to the application. Swiggy's UI UX is internal as well as outsourced. So primarily, we do have an internal UI UX team as well, and it's not completely outsourced. There are certain people who are obviously putting in their pointers for us as well. Any other questions?
Sure, Sejal, it was very insightful session, and I think in chat as well, people have appreciated a lot and they enjoyed your session.